Hello, readers, and welcome back to Misshelved, your bi-weekly dose of bookstore love. I'm your host, Nicole Brinkley, and I hope you're ready for today's delightful episode. Our bookseller for today is Stephanie Heinz.
Hi, I am Stephanie Heinz, and I am the children's manager at Print a Bookstore in Portland, Maine.
I've had the pleasure of visiting Print a Bookstore, and it's a wonderful store. I also have the great pleasure of calling Steph one of my closest friends. Though she doesn't talk about it in this episode, she can make you feel things during tabletop roleplay games like nobody else I know. Her partner for today's episode is the talented Melissa Sweet.
Hi, my name's Melissa Sweet. I'm the author and illustrator of Some Writer, the story of E.B. White, and Balloons Over Broadway.
Listen in as Melissa and Stephanie talk about books as art, creating with audience in mind, the Maine book community, and a particularly haunted edition of the Pokey Little Puppy.
I love the title of this podcast, Misshelved. And as someone whose books are kind of all over the map on my bookshelves, I wondered as a bookseller if you have ever found some odd juxtaposition. Somebody picks up a book and they stick it somewhere else and you find it later.
Oh, definitely. I almost kind of wish that we just had baskets out like you sometimes see at libraries where you're like, oh, if you pulled off a book, just put it in this shelf and we'll take care of it. I think it's the funniest thing, especially when books somehow travel from one end of the store to the other. We have a psychology section. In that psychology section, we have a book about sex. And then all of a sudden you're looking at the children's nonfiction section and there's a book that clearly is not for children's nonfiction. And it's one of those things that makes you thankful that you found it hopefully before other kids did, but also worried about, oh, how many people saw this here and didn't say anything, and how many parents saw that was like, we're not coming back here again. They need to curate better. It definitely happens sometimes. And kind of as another element of that too, there's lots of times that books come in and they could go a lot of different places and you don't really know what the correct place is sometimes, which ties into that a little as well. And you're worried about misshelving those books and putting them where people aren't going to find them, especially since Print's a relatively small store. So we don't usually have multiple copies of things on hand. So it can be hard to choose, okay, is this the right place for it? Or is this going to be the place where people will find it?
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the things I love about your store and its size is that I feel as if I can go into the store and ask about a title or something I've heard on the radio, and you all will know exactly what I'm talking about.
We certainly try. It can be tough sometimes, but the number of characters who come in, and this is an age-old bookseller joke of someone coming in being like, okay, I'm looking for this book. It's red. There might be a bird or like a lady on it, one of those two things, and just the miraculous brain moment when you piece things together enough to figure out what they might be talking about feels so satisfying.
Yeah, that's fun. That's fun. I remember when I first got started in children's books, well, I hadn't started yet, actually. I was looking to be published, and I got a job in Brookline, Massachusetts at the children's bookshop. The woman who owned the store at the time was Rusty Browder, who went on to be a librarian. And I did it because I wanted to be immersed in children's books and at least be in on that side of it while I was hoping to be published. And I got to know the books pretty well too. And somebody had a similar thing. They came in and they said, it's like in Australia or New Zealand or Tasmania, I don't know where it is. And it's kind of like the burr yip. And she had this really odd word. And I said, the bunyip of Berkeley's Creek. And I felt like I was in the Oscars or something. It was like, I really got it. And it was just such an obscure book. I just was pleased with myself.
I don't think I knew that you started out in bookselling. I think that's the first I've heard about that. That's exciting.
Yeah, it was, because it was absolutely a children's bookshop, and she had old books too, vintage books, which were really fun to look at. But authors came through. So I felt like it was an education. And when you're 24 or whatever, however old I was, it didn't really matter what the education looked like. I was doing something in that field. And of course, I loved the authors, Lisbeth Zwerger and Chris Van Allsburg, etc. David Macaulay, that was kind of the heyday of the 1980s. And so it was quite a thrill. I wasn't a children's literature major in the least. I didn't have that background of being able to recommend a lot of books, but I could certainly talk through it with people and do some recommending. I was there a year, maybe two, enough that I was able to cash out the cash register pretty well. So that was my claim to fame.
There are a few things as stressful as being a bookseller as like counting the penny drawer when there's also customers trying to walk up to you and you're just like, hold on 1 second. All right, now I have to recount.
That's funny. That's really funny.
But I can also imagine too, since you mentioned the vintage books that the store had, I know nowadays with your art, you explore a lot with some collage and some found objects and texture. Were you interested in collage at that point in time? Was that something that you were considering at all, looking at those vintage styles?
At that time, not at all. Interestingly enough, that was a time when I was learning watercolor, mostly water medium, and I had done collage in college. I went to a 2-year art school, and it was really fun. I loved it. But I didn't see that on the horizon in the least. And I don't think I would have thought it was going to be ever okay to cut up a vintage book, the way I do now. Like everything's fodder. If I had even mentioned that, I think everybody in the bookstore would have frozen. Like they would have been in shock to even think that. But at that time, the Boston area, where Brookline's just outside of Boston, there were a lot of people teaching classes in bookbinding, and Massachusetts in general has a very, very avid book arts community. So that was thrilling to learn paper making and paper marbling and kind of going back to that old school, how do you build a book? How is a book crafted? That was as interesting to me as writing or illustrating. Being a bookseller served me well as far as education goes.
Yeah, that's definitely a field that I'm super interested in as well. When I was in college, I don't remember the exact name of it, but it pretty much was just a book arts class where it was primarily people who were in the writing and English department, but it was a class that was actually hosted by our poetry teacher, but in the art studio. So it was a cool change of space. So we were looking at some super different forms of books. We were looking at some erasure poetry. And for that, one of the projects that we had was to kind of create our own book arts project. And so I ended up getting this used copy of the Pokey Little Puppy Golden Book because I was like, that's something that I loved as a child. Let me see what I can do with it now. And I think I still have it somewhere, but I ended up taking out all of the pages and I did an erasure poem just with black paint. And I think I also cut out like the main subject of each of the pages and then I rearranged them and then sewed them back together in an accordion style. And it was so much fun just being able to deconstruct this object.
Well, I am so impressed. Not only that you did that, but that your teacher thought to do that. That's amazing. I love the sound of that. And it would be really cool to see what the Pokey Little Puppy looked like when you were done with it. Right?
It ended up pretty dark and twisted, which was not my intention, but when you take out enough context of something, it can get scary a little. I remember being a little surprised by that. When I was in college too, as part of the writing major, our final project, instead of writing a major paper or something, we did chapbooks. So I ended up using erasure as part of that as well. One of my favorite books, Notes from No Man's Land by Eulabis, I ended up just getting vellum paper, tracing paper, and just putting them over random pages. And then I would just copy over the words that jumped out at me. And then once I looked at those words, I'd look at the page more and be like, okay, what else can I bring into the page to have this make sense? And then I ended up printing it all on vellum paper so it overlaps in the final chapbook as well. It was a lot of fun.
Wow, that sounds really fun. And to have a hands-on project as opposed to writing a paper just sounds like heaven, right?
Yeah, it was a really cool program. And it was definitely one of those things that when I graduated college, I had a choice to make where I was either going to go to the Columbia Publishing course, which was a summer program at Columbia University, or I'd also gotten accepted into the book arts and writing program at Mills College, which I was super excited about. I was not expecting to get accepted, but they just didn't give quite enough money to convince me to fly across the country and relocate myself and try something completely new. But every now and again, I'll think about what would life have been like? Alternate universe life where I was bold enough to make that choice.
Yeah, well, you could still do it. At any point, you could absolutely go back into book arts or just do it on your own a lot more. I think it's just exponentially popular to do things like whiteout and blackout poetry, just to take books and create a whole new visual and a whole new story. I'm just curious, with the Pokey Little Puppy, was it very spontaneous? Did you consider what you were doing, or were you just, it was sort of flying by the seat of your pants? How did it feel when you were actually creating that Blackout poet?
The one conscious decision that I definitely had about it was the fact that I wanted to not just do an erasure of the text, but also of the images, since I thought that was an important part of being a picture book. But pretty similar to when I was talking about the chapbook that I made for my final project, I didn't have anything specifically in mind for what theme I wanted to pull out of it. And I kind of just approached it of, okay, what words are standing out to me now and how do I want to play with that aspect?
Yeah.
So the form itself, I definitely had a plan for, but the writing of it, I was just more explorative.
That's the beauty of it. That's what it's all about. It's really intuitive, I think, and you go with your gut.
Yeah, it's fun to see what is created when you kind of take your own mind out of it and you're not thinking, okay, what's the end game, and more of just how do I get there.
It's a really nice way to make art with it because it takes the pressure off. It becomes its own entity, and that's a really cool thing. I just think there's a lot of freedom in playing that way.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's interesting too because that was specifically for a class assignment, and so I knew exactly who the audience was going to be for it, but I also could never fully forget the fact that there was some form of an audience for it, which I feel like is something that I often hear authors and illustrators talk about, is that you can't get distracted by the idea of this audience, but at the same time it was almost a pressure on it of figuring out what I was going to do and wanting it to be impressive, wanting my classmates to think that it was interesting. Is that something that you feel like you ever deal with right now, of kind of getting caught up with the idea of, okay, who is the audience and how are they going to think about things? Do you feel that shaping the way that you create?
I try not to think about the audience at all. I take a page from E.B. White's book and say, this is for an audience of one. This is for me. What is it about this project that where I see it sparkling and want to kind of gravitate in those directions? There have been people I work with that say, oh, we'll start out the project and they'll question, what is the age group? How will librarians use this book? And I feel as though that is really the cart before the horse, that the project needs to get underway and the book finds its own way. So no, I try very hard not to think of them. I think audience is such an interesting question because, especially with kids' books, because so many, for instance, picture book biographies are perfectly suited to adults. And I think often as an adult, if I had never seen, for instance, A River of Words, and I picked up this picture book biography on William Carlos Williams, the poet, I would have learned so much about William Carlos Williams. I would have gravitated towards a lot of other work by him. So I think that they're great for any age. I hope the day comes that it segues more into, we make a book and it finds its audience, or that more books for adults are highly illustrated and they become more like specimens. Maybe our libraries won't be as full, but that each book we have is a beautiful specimen of a book that you're going to keep forever. Something like that. The paper, the production, the content. I think it happens all the time. I just think a lot of other stuff happens too.
Especially with, there is some shift. Now, I don't think nearly as much as what people were expecting, but a shift towards more digital media and digital reading, is that I feel like that means that the physical object of the book, as you said, the paper or the illustrations or what have you, needs to have more to it and needs to make the book more of a precious object, of a reason to, this is why you want a physical copy of something and not just get the information from a screen. I was just thinking the other day, Mary H.K. Choi's second book, Permanent Record, I got a galley of it. I love it. I'm obsessed with all of her books. And the physical hardcover edition of it has this really great aspect of it where it uses the jacket in an interesting way, where there is images printed on the board of the book, but the jacket itself has some see-through sections of it. So the way that the images layer on top of each other is super cool. I have a galley of it, but I had to buy a hardcover edition of it as well because it's just so cool to look at and to have as an object. I definitely suggest checking it out.
My first question is it a die cut? Something cut out of the paper cover?
What I love about it is it's not actually a die cut. It's actually a clear material. Because another fun thing about bookselling is that die cuts look really pretty, but most of them get so damaged on the shelf that it's a kind of a love-hate relationship that I have with them. So I loved the idea that the designer took a different approach with it, where it feels like a much sturdier way to do a similar aspect of having the layers to the book speak to something without having to worry about, oh, this book's going to get caught on all the other things when you're putting it on the shelf.
That's why I wanted to know, because I'm always so curious. Librarians don't like it either. Those things are sometimes so much fun, but we definitely are urged to steer away from it. But this sounds super cool. I'm definitely going to look for it.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to step back to what you were talking about specifically with children's books and the audience that they have for them, and particularly looking at children's nonfiction, because it reminded me, I think it was a couple years ago now, that there was someone who was on Jeopardy that was winning a whole bunch and doing super well, and everyone was really amazed by this long streak they had. And I remember that there was an interview done with them, and they were like, how do you know all this information? Like, how do you have all these facts? And they just said kids books. Like, there's no other way to have such a wide breadth of information if you're not going to be looking at kids books, because it's how you can get important facts and how you can have them in digestible ways without, spending a month of your life reading a 1,500 page book, which also has value, but not everyone has the time for that.
Exactly. You said it perfectly. I feel like that should be information in every library when you walk in, in the biography section, especially, or nonfiction section. Yeah, it's super cool that you can get the essence of something in a children's picture book or nonfiction book. Exactly.
And there's also the element that because the quote unquote intended audience is younger readers, I feel like there is more space given for it to be something that's entertaining and something that's engaging. And there still is the educational side of it, obviously, but I don't always feel like the author is trying to impress you as much with, oh, look how much I know, and more trying to get you excited to learn more and to ask more questions, versus sometimes on the adult side of things, it can be a lot of, I am an expert on this and I am an expert, so that means I must write a book so everyone knows how great I am.
Well, they're definitely more intense. Not that the research, in my mind, I imagine that many authors I know do so much research that I can only imagine that in some cases it's the same as for an adult book, biography, or any nonfiction book. It's just, you do need to know that information to choose what direction the story is going to take you, what you need, what angle, for instance, you're going to take a biography in. Just requires a ton of research. I loved that Jeopardy guy. I think he did a good thing for all libraries.
It's no better way to sell kids books than someone who has such a large platform like that, talking about how important they are to readers of all ages and what such a great resource they are.
True.
I would like to take a little bit time and talk more about community, not just as readers, but as people who are involved in the creation of children's books. I know something that we've talked about some is specifically in the Portland area, and about ways that we want to try and help foster and encourage that type of community here. I know you had some projects that you had in mind. Is there anything that you'd be open to talking a little bit about now?
Yeah, there was a couple years ago, when after I had written Some Writer, that I went to Nashville, and the whole school district of Nashville had written, no, I take that back. It wasn't the whole school district. It was the whole community had read Charlotte's Web. So all the adults read it, all the kids read it. And I was so impressed by that. When I got to that school, they told me a little bit more about it. And they said that everybody got in on it. So there were football players who would read a chapter aloud. The mayor would read a chapter. They were all doing the same chapter at the same time. And I never experienced a richer program on any level. They were a community with this common anchor. What they said to me was that in the school district, there were rivalries, especially with sports, but that when they all were reading Charlotte's Web, they were all on an even playing field. And that was not something anyone ever expected to see happen. For a while, I was thinking, wouldn't it be super cool to do a Maine reads of Charlotte's Web? It still could happen for sure, but that it was just a way of coming together, all different walks of life, and sharing it with the kids from every angle, and all kinds of people pitching in to share that chapter or a part of a chapter. I can't recall why. There have been community reads in Maine, but maybe sometime it'll just seem like the perfect book. I would love to be a part of something like that. I think it would be really fun. Oh, and the other thing they did in Nashville that I loved was all the store owners got involved, and there was this gigantic scavenger hunt. So they would put something in their store window. They would acknowledge that they were a part of the Charlotte's Web program, and the kids might have to find like 4 pictures of Wilbur or 4 little tiny Wilburs hidden throughout the store. And when they came in, they would get something like stickers or credit towards a book. It was just a wonderful way to engage everybody. I thought, what a good idea. That was just fun, the way they thought of all the different ways to engage the kids with the book. The book became kind of 3-dimensional to my ears, how they described it.
I love that idea of, as you said, it was an even playing field. And, it's one of those books that even kids who aren't necessarily reading books of that length on their own, it can still be a read aloud book, and it's something that they can still engage with it. And it's something that I guess a couple months ago at this point, Anna Crowley Redding, who's another local author here in the Portland area, she just had 2 picture books come out over the summer. The most recent one was Chowder Rules, which is a historical nonfiction picture book about this competition between whether or not chowder should have tomatoes or not. But I know something else that she was doing over the summer was trying to connect kids with grandparents or just with older people in the community and doing a shared read online, since we're in this situation where people can't gather together physically. And I love that idea once again of children's books being a way of bringing people together regardless of what stage of their own life they're at.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It sounds like a really great idea, actually.
I'd love to find a way to expand that concept a little bit more, and how books bring those different people together and how they can share that experience regardless of the limitations on them right now.
Yeah, definitely true. I think Portland, well, Maine in general, has a gigantic literature community, and the amount of people involved in children's literature is really huge, and it's across the state for sure. Portland has a lot of people, but it's really across the state. I guess historically, artists came to Maine in general, but it's such a great place to live and work.
Community here in Portland and community in Maine is one of those things that obviously I knew that there were plenty of authors who are either from Maine or who have houses here or summer in Maine, but it really feels like this kind of treasure trove that I wasn't expecting when I got into bookselling here in Portland, because I'm not originally from Maine or from this area. I just felt so lucky to have all of these amazing creatives kind of at my fingertips, people who want to do school visits, people who want to host events at the store, and it's just amazing to be able to share a space with those people. And I just feel like I learn so much about my job of selling books by being able to interact with the people who are creating them firsthand.
Definitely, yes, and it's a gigantic gift to all of us in the field too, to be able to go to the store and hear other people talk, or to go to Mecca's lecture series, or the Illustration Institute, bringing in people from all over the map for their summer program. And I know that they have a lot of stuff online, but it's such an education. It is really, really rich. I'm not sure every state is like this, but We're really lucky.
Yeah, and then also having the telling room based here in
Yes.
Portland, which is a program that works with school-aged kids, I think even starting as young as kindergarten, definitely through high school, where they do a lot of writing workshops both on their site at the telling room here in Portland, but also out in the classrooms, out in the surrounding areas, and even taking it a step further, have publishing workshops where they are putting students in contact with professional published authors, where they're working on books and they're getting them published and we sell them at our store. And
Oh,
it's amazing, and it's just one of those things that makes you feel like there is a level of things in Maine and in Portland where it feels like a larger community commitment to fostering this idea of encouraging creativity and encouraging literacy and encouraging storytelling. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for talking with me. This has been a lot of fun to be able to know about your background with bookselling, which is always fun, and also just to really gush over how much we love the creative field here in Portland, Maine. Once again, my name is Stephanie Heinz. I am the children's manager at Print a Bookstore. You can mainly find me on Twitter at Steph_Heinz. That's STEPH_HEINZ. That's where I am mostly shouting about book stuff.
Steph, I loved talking to you. We've known each other a long time, but I really enjoyed this and feel like the bookstore is even more like home now for me. My name's Melissa Sweet. You can find me at my website, melissasweet.net, or on Instagram at melissasweetillustrator. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for having us.
If you liked today's episode, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and tell a friend about Misshelved. To keep up to date with all of our bookish hijinks, follow us at Misshelved Pod on Twitter and Instagram. If you really like what happens here, and we hope you do, head over to our Patreon page to help fund this podcast and our Misshelved newsletter. Thank you for listening, and as always, happy reading.